what is going on with Olympic Village real estate? France spent $1.85 billion with a B on building the Olympic Village. They have an average temperature in August of 78 degrees.
Okay.
They had a heat wave happen. So it hasn't been 78 degrees. It's been a few days have been in the 90s over there. One of their biggest priorities in building this Olympic Village was to build it green.
Yeah.
So what do they not have?
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning. Good morning. This is Lance Kenmore with the Kenmore team, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's edition of the Tri-Cities Real Estate Update. As always, you can contact me, Lance Kenmore, anytime direct on my cell phone at 509-727-8977 or visit us on the web at kenmoreteam.com. Once again, I always like to thank John for hosting and everybody here at the station for working to make this happen. Mr. John McKay, how you doing over there?
Well, getting ready to have another warm weekend.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that on the show today. We have a lot intertwined together on the show, and temps are going to become a very important topic on today's show. I think we're headed for, yesterday was a barn burner, and I think we're headed back to 100 again today.
100 today, 102 tomorrow, and then,
that'll be a little bit. So AC systems, AC is going to be talked about today for sure. Well, John, I'm just going to tell you, I am abnormally tired.
Okay.
And I've got my shirt on today because it's all about Olympics. I can't get to bed at a normal time right now because all I'm doing is watching the Olympics.
Yes.
You know how you become an expert at all these sports? You have no clue about the rest of the year?
Yeah, a few years ago we did that with curling.
Yes, right. Yeah, I don't care if it's Winter Olympics, Summer Olympics. It's competition is so exciting. And so we're going to bring that into today's topic. So we're going to start with our local real estate story first because our national celebrity story is pretty much the show today. Okay. Because we're going to be talking about the Olympic Village and the real estate portion of it. Okay. But before we do, let's hit some local things that really affect our local buyers and sellers right now. Fed meeting about interest rates this last week. The second time. Earlier in the year, we talked about rate cuts coming second half of the year. Then, a few months ago, we were back to thinking we might not even get rate cuts this year. And now the language is trending that September rate cuts might be back on the table again. So that's what was announced. The market responds to those topics and builds that into the rate much quicker than that happens. Yeah. And so we saw rates fall to some of the lowest levels they've been at for the year this last week. And so at one point, I saw a 30-year mortgage at 6.175 and 15-year at 5.5. And so those rates are getting very, very attractive again, and that is spurring buyer activity in our local market. The other thing to note that goes along with that really well for us locally is I've got the July stats in. Currently, right now, active listings on the market, a new high that we haven't seen in years. Again, 900 active listings. Okay, and that's a big, big difference than we've had the last 6 years here in this market. But a monster July, 329 listings sold. And look at this, average sold price, $468,000. So average sales price creeping back up there again. Listings under contract, which would be our leading indicator for August now, 296. So pretty strong activity. I knew as busy as I was that the whole market probably was that way, but it's nice to see that come out in the numbers. So, yeah, today John, I can't help but be, and my research is off the charts. I probably have enough for two shows.
Ooh.
But I am all in on what is going on with Olympic Village real estate. Okay, because there's been news stories that athletes were leaving the village, that certain gymnasts had flown in their own mattresses to the village. And so I said, from a real estate perspective, let's take a look at what happens there. And also, in years past, I've seen villages from previous Olympics become abandoned and go vacant. And so when you look at those pictures, you're like, how does a country deal with something like this? Because it's a massive undertaking. So if you look at the raw numbers, France spent $1.85 billion with a B on building the Olympic Village.
Wow.
It was the largest single site construction project in France the last 4 years. And so when you have that, you have to look at that and say, okay, number one, Paris does not have a lot of space available.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you do in a situation like that? Well, you go out and you try to revitalize an area.
Yes.
And when you revitalize an area, you're likely going to be going to industrial type area or an area with older buildings that are dilapidated, and you're going to have to tear those down. And then now you have a transportation issue. So you have to build like a rail station to get out there, bus routes to get out there. So they were dealing with a lot that was going on there. And the reason I alluded to the fact at the beginning of the show that we were going to be talking about temperatures, because some of the news stories you've been seeing are actually a real estate problem. And a weather problem too. But here's the deal. When you look at Paris, they have an average temperature in August of 78 degrees.
Okay.
I can deal with 78 degrees. Now, later today, we all know what 100's going to feel like. But here's the thing. It's 78 degrees, and then they had a heat wave happen. So it hasn't been 78 degrees. It's been a few days have been in the 90s over there. Okay, if you look at Kennewick, average August temperatures are 91 degrees.
Yeah.
So what happens in a country like France, in a city like Paris, is you have a couple things happening. Number one of their biggest priorities in building this Olympic Village was to build it green.
Yeah.
Okay? And part of that was lower power consumption. So what do they not have?
Air conditioning.
Air conditioning sucks up a lot of power. Did not meet one of their initiatives. And so they do have, I will tell you, and I've gone on way too deep dive of this, but they do have very cool, they have a geothermal heating system going through most of these buildings. So they're pumping water through the floors like radiant heating. And that is something that most people have at least heard about.
Yes.
What is becoming, I wouldn't say more popular, but another theory that's out there now is utilizing those same pipes to also be cooling.
Oh.
So meaning you're going to run cool water through those same pipes when it's hot outside to cool the natural temperature. But we have a problem. Heat works really well in radiant floor heating.
Yeah.
Because heat
rises.
And so you're heating that ambient air temperature. Cooling is more difficult in that situation. It does not tend to rise with the same type of effect. So you're cooling surfaces that are close to those pipes, but not getting as much. The interviews that I saw from the French officials and from the builders of the system say that they can cool the ambient air temperature between 6 to 10 degrees. Okay, well, if you're a world-class athlete and you're on the 4th floor or 5th floor of one of these buildings and it's 92 degrees out, and I'm going to say 6 degrees is probably more accurate than 10. If they gave me a range like that,
Yeah.
and you're on the upper floors, they're only able to cool those buildings to 84 degrees.
Yeah.
And those athletes are not used to that.
They are
struggling.
not.
And so one of the things that you also have to look at is how can we make that system better? Well, for this initiative, when one of the main goals of it was lowering their carbon footprint, using less electricity, and they go on and they talk about positioning of the building, shades so that not as much sunlight is getting in them. But you can only do so much in those situations. Many of these athletes now have had to bring in portable air conditioning units. That's drawing now more power than they anticipated for those buildings. It causes all kinds of problems.
Yeah.
So you look back and say, well, if this heat wave hadn't happened, would we have been okay in this situation? Probably it would have been a lot different situation if the average temperature had stayed in the mid 70s, because then you can cool that room down to 68, 69, not as big of a deal, right?
Yes.
And so you look at these buildings, and from a real estate perspective, I think what's really interesting is these buildings were built with a very specific purpose, and they got developers involved so that this doesn't become a plight like other of these abandoned villages have become. They built these with the purpose to, when the athletes leave, many of these buildings get retrofitted with some small changes. They were designed in a specific way, turned into residences, and there's going to be 6,000 residences for sale. In this village, and they're going to make it basically a housing community. It's outside the outskirts of Paris, and so you're not getting the high dollar Paris prices.
Yeah.
So they're selling for a little bit cheaper than those properties would be in Paris. They're hoping that by having some development companies involved with this, that they're recouping some of the money, and it's not costing the state, it's not costing France and Paris billions of dollars that they won't recoup.
Yeah.
However, France, very, very similar situation in the last year that the United States has had. So they have to break ground on these projects 3 years ago.
Yes.
At the time that they did that, the interest rates in France, some of them were as low as 1% to 2%. Okay, even lower than what we were seeing in the United States. This project looks really, really appealing in that situation.
Yeah.
What happened since then, and it sounds great to us, but it's all relative to what you're used to. Since then, the rates in France have increased to 4% or over. So much like what we had happening in the U.S., they've doubled their rates. Now these large projects have come online. Some of these apartments have been pre-marketed, meaning before the Olympics. They want to get the bump and the exposure from the Olympics. And so things are for sale now. Like, you can go now. And thanks to Google Translate, I have the numbers for you, John. You can go and buy an apartment. Technically, I mean, they call it apartment in France. It'd probably be similar to a condo. But you could buy an apartment in France now in the Olympic Village. So a massive, and I'm being a little facetious here, the cheapest one I could find, we've got a 450 square foot, 2-room apartment, and that is coming in priced at $395,000.
Wow.
So that's expensive for that square footage, right? When you look at this, the next size up, 710 square feet, we've got coming on at roughly $500,000 US dollars. And then the largest one, I'm sure there's some more, but in the brochures I got, and I got to tell you now, I'm freaking, because of this radio show, I'm being spammed by French real estate listings now, because I had to sign up and put my email address in to get this brochure that I wanted. But 1,000 square foot apartment in the Olympic Village in France, it's going to run you $517,000.
Wow.
Now, sales have been slower than they wanted to from a pre-sale perspective because of interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
I love this quote that I found through the Associated French Press from a
Okay.
real estate agent. I think this is my French spirit animal realtor over there.
Okay.
And this gentleman, Salim Muabi, says he runs a local brokerage, and he says they haven't put the apartments on sale too early. They just put them on sale with prices that were too high. So I love this guy, right? Because it's very realistic. They were talking about slower sales than expected and people being able to. I mean, you got to look, if there's a chance to sell these things with the exposure that they have from the world right now, you're never going to get more people to be looking at this or be there than they are right now. The other thing, the challenge that you have in a falling market, I tell people this all the time. When there's nothing available, and prices are just going up, up, and up, and they're expecting in France this year, prices have already fallen by 2%. They're expecting that prices in Paris and around could fall another 5 to 10% this year. In a falling market, the challenge that developers have is bringing people to an area that has generally been associated with rundown housing and high crime. Okay, because that's the thing, right? They're trying to rebuild an area that has a reputation. When people say, "Oh, I want to be
in this district."
Yeah, in North Paris or whatever the location is, or in this district, and they're like, "No, that is, not the schools that we want, etc. Not the area that we want, high crime statistics." That's a big ship to turn around. And so, but when there's nothing else available, people look at what are subpar locations or subpar properties. That's not the case now because they have a falling market. There were some other great quotes in there from developers that says it's too soon to panic. And as rates come back, they believe, and they get these retrofitted so people can see what they are after the Olympics, and start selling in early 2025 and getting people to move in. Of course, they're hoping that it'll change.
Yeah.
But I do like my realtor quote that I found from this gentleman. If I go to Paris, that's who I'm using. So that is a quick, how would I say it, state of the Olympic Village real estate.
Interesting.
Now, my question will be, after the fact, is there a price increase for the rooms where the gold medalists stayed? Like, what if you could get and pick out, I mean, was it France's rugby team?
Yeah.
What if you could get rooms or apartments where the rugby team won? Or
I'd go with the
Simone Biles was staying. If you
or
could
Ryan
buy that
Krauser,
apartment.
the guy from Gresham, Oregon, that's expected to win the shot put again for the U.S.
So I'm going to have to come back to this story a year later and see. Because I know real estate, right? Like I could not hold back from that.
Yeah.
If I knew that the converted unit I was doing was in, I would try to get pictures of the gold medalist being in there. And I will say, the reason why I'm confident in the French and their ability to market this is, here's what Google Translate said from the brochure of some of these apartments for sale. And I love this. To be at the peak is to be at the top of one's time. We have implemented all the means to ensure this achievement lives up to this ambition. So now it's your turn to become a legend.
Ooh.
All you have to do is give me $500,000, McKay.
Okay.
I could go over there, pick out an apartment for you in the Olympic Village. But it doesn't come without a couple problems. And as we talked about, it doesn't come with AC. So one of the things that, as I read through a lot of this, and I think some of these developers, sometimes get caught up in, and there's been a big push. We all know that as we move forward, energy conservation, building green, building more environmentally friendly buildings. That's a big push that we see, and a lot of pressure goes into making that happen.
Well, like you've got the Climate Pledge Arena that the Kraken play in.
Absolutely. You got recycled rainwater in the ice, and there's a lot of this when we look around that goes on. And in the building industry, when it makes things efficient and lowers our footprint and less energy to build, eventually in the long run, you're going to be paying less. So that is fantastic, but I see people make mistakes at times. And so I've got a couple of the biggest one today, because I will say that if we look at it right now in the midst of this heat wave, I think there's some criticism about using the geothermal cooling. Can it really handle those spikes, and what does that look like? Now, not everybody's an Olympic athlete and always going to be preparing for the Olympics, so it might not be as big of a deal moving forward, but it sure seems like a big deal for this particular event. But one of the things we see that happens a lot, and I talk to people about this a lot, and it's a call as a realtor that is tough for me to take. And that is when someone calls me and they said, "Hey, Lance, I bought my house 2 years ago. I need to resell it because I'm getting relocated for a job, transfer, or I don't like the area anymore." And so I ask some standard questions, and sometimes I ask, like, what upgrades have you done to the house? It's only 2 years old. I don't imagine you've done a lot. And they say, "Well, I did one huge upgrade, and I put on a $40,000 solar system."
Oh.
At which point I'm usually cringing on the phone call, because that is generally a long-term payback item. And so what happens in that situation a lot of times is, if someone did that, if I put two houses on the market, two identical houses on the market in Tri-City, and in new construction, that's very easy to do. Let's say we just talked about average sales price being roughly $450,000. I have a brand new construction 2 years ago, 1,500 square feet, $450,000, and it's exactly how it was 2 years ago. The neighbor has the exact same house, but they have a $40,000 solar system up on the roof. Both of them need to sell, and we go to put both houses on the market. One at $450,000, and the other one, supposedly, McKay, with the math, what do you gonna $450,000 plus $40,000 in solar, $490,000?
$490,000.
Same exact house. You walk through that. I mean, you tell me. You and I are out there in the community. You walk through both of those houses. You gonna pay $500 for the one with solar on it?
No.
Not a chance, right?
No, because it's likely going to be on the roof.
It is.
But it doesn't do anything to enhance it's not like a pool or a game room or anything like that.
That house is going to feel exactly the same as the next one that you walk in.
Yes.
And so, and I would say 99% of the time, the buyers I walk through with, that's going to be the situation. Now, here's what happens in real estate, John.
Okay.
We reduced the price of that house that had the solar put on to $460,000. That one's at $460,000. The other one's at $450,000. Now, which one are you going to buy?
I'm going to buy the cheaper one.
You're still going cheaper.
Yeah.
And some people might do that. But now I would say we're closer to 50 or 60% of the time. 50 or 60% of the time, because now that solar system is on sale. It's 75% off. You're getting it installed, done for basically $10,000. So, and I'm not bashing solar. I don't need those calls or emails. You guys can just hold from hitting the send button.
Yes.
I'm not bashing solar as an industry or that. I'm just saying, for that particular upgrade, I would be doing the same thing if someone wants to install gold-plated sinks. Yeah. So, but you got to look at your time and payback. And now a lot of people are saying, well, man, I thought I was going to be here for, 10
20 years. Yeah.
So that's what I put it in. And I understand that. It's still unfortunate in that situation. But a lot of those green add-ons in the building industry, you really have to think about how long you're actually going to be in that home and if you're going to get the payoff. Because I can tell you, from a real estate sales perspective, there will come a time in our industry when that's worth more, dollar for dollar. But that time, we're not anywhere even close to that time right now. And so, especially in that situation, like buyers will ask us about it in general, but I've yet to have a buyer specifically buy one house over the other for lots more money just because it had solar on it. So pay attention to that when you're doing that. That's one of those ones that gets a little bit dicey for me in that situation. The other thing that we see happen a lot in that case, the other thing I see happen all the time is roofing materials. Like you've got to look around and say, what's normal for the type of house you're on? I've seen people put terracotta tile roofs when they replace them on a house that is $400,000. And I normally never see roofing like that until we get to an $800,000 house.
Yeah.
And so when they did that, if they were going to stay there for the next 40 years that's supposed to last, that's great. And then you'll get the lifespan out of it. If you think you're going to sell anytime in the next 5 to 20 years, you probably don't need to spend that on roofing.
Yeah.
On such an advanced type of roofing. So that's another one that you have to be really, really careful about. Some of the things you don't have to be careful about that almost always will pay back faster is heating and cooling energy efficiency. So the changes that they have made in the efficiency of the units in heating and cooling have been tremendous.
Yeah.
That, along with the changes they've made in programmable thermostats and schedules that you can set the house up on, those items will tend to save you more money at a much faster pace than some of these other green building materials. And then look for the simple things when you're thinking about this also. And by that, I mean, if you're going to build a new house, consider the orientation of the home. Is it west facing so it gets more direct sunlight? Are there solar shades that help keep that sunlight out of the house so you're not having to cool it as much? Where are you going to put the patio? How are you going to regulate the temperature on it? You can do a lot of stuff with orientation and then some landscaping with very specific trees to help in that situation for not a lot of money that's going to totally kill your resale if you have to sell in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you too, like, it's not just from a real estate perspective. I called a number of appraisers before I did the show just to make sure before I said, and I see these appraisals. And when I see these appraisals come through and they come through with these type of numbers, I can tell you for solar systems that are 30 to 40,000, the appraisers, and that's who the bank answers to, they are not giving anywhere near $30,000 to $40,000 for those solar systems. It's going to be pennies on the dollar on your appraisal. So we have to be careful about that as well, because if the buyer of your house is getting any sort of financing, that house is going to have to appraise, and that lien's going to have to be paid off before that can be considered part of the real estate that transfers to the buyer. That, there can't be an existing long-term loan on that for the appraiser to count it as part of the real estate value. So just some items to be considering when you're looking at that. And I really think, yes, they built the Olympic Village with 30% less carbon than normal buildings built in France. But at the same time, I don't think they quite considered some of these other ramifications that go along with it, especially for an event like this on the world stage. And then what's going to be really fun to do is a year from now, follow up at and see what these prices look like. Yeah. What's still available? What, how is that area responding now that the spotlight is off of it? So it's a very interesting, I hope it works out for the community, because it would be sad to see $2 billion like that spent and then have this turn into another abandoned, failed housing. It would be much better if somebody could use the Olympics. Like, I love the theory where they're going, I just think they spent some of the money in the wrong spots. Like, this is great. Spend that money, get a housing development, revitalize an area that needs revitalized. The model is awesome. It's just going to be fun to go back and see what the execution.
Well, and if you look online, you can see pictures of Greece, and I'm trying to think. There's a place in Europe that also they show some of these, like one of the Winter Olympic venues where the bobsled facility is completely abandoned.
Oh yeah, like I think if you look at like Sochi, or even some more recently, like some of the Rio Olympics, the swimming aquatic centers. Empty, yeah. Like BMX guys and skateboarders, just graffiti everywhere. That's all. No, I just threw them under the bus. But no, there are some pictures that are very, very interesting. If you have any questions about that at all, go to kenmoreteam.com, shoot us a message. Enjoy the rest of the Olympics.
Yep.
Go Team USA. Have a great one. And we will be back here analyzing real estate next week.
Right here on News Talk 870.